السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله حسين حسين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, Assalamu alaikum to both of you, Sister Rebecca Masterton and Said Ali Abbas Razawi. Thank you so much for accepting the Ashura Reflections podcast series. This year is on the idea of reform. And this episode is on reform of the soul, in which we have looked at the heart already in the previous episode. And now we're interested in looking at how does the individual self-develop and grow and reform ourselves from habits we don't want, or issues that we don't want to face, or levels of growth that we've not yet received. How do we get to that next level of development? And because it's obviously Ashura and Muharram, we want to find in Abu Abdullah an ally in our own struggle. Somehow in the way we interact with Muharram or Imam Hussain, I'm reforming my soul in a very productive way. And I'm hoping that this discussion, inshallah, is beneficial for the listener in their own personal journey, inshallah. But I think to make sense of these issues, because they can get very abstract and they can get very difficult to understand, let's understand what exactly are we speaking about. So when we say soul, we should know what it is we're referring to. And when we say reform, we should know what it means to reform the soul. I was wondering if we could start with you, Sister Rebecca. First, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for accepting. The soul in our tradition, how it's a Western word to describe, I guess, an Islamic concept. What is the good way of translating or understanding the idea of the soul in the human being?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. There isn't actually a consensus, as far as I know, in Islamic tradition on what the soul is. So, of course, we have this word nafs, which can also mean self or essence. But the early scholars were not agreed upon how you actually define this nafs or this essence. Some of them said it's like a substance in between materiality and immateriality. It is seen to be the location of emotions and desires. So this is what is different between the Islamic tradition, say, and the post-Enlightenment European tradition, where we tend to think of the heart as the seat of the emotion from the European tradition, whereas Islamically, the soul is the seat of the emotion, the desires, the fears, and perhaps some kind of fixed characteristics as well, whereas the heart tends to be the location of the intellect, the intuitive aspect of the intellect. So if we're trying to reform our soul, that means that, of course, we need to then do a lot of reflection on our own characteristics that we have, and our tendencies and our weaknesses and our strengths.
Yeah, so thank you for making clear the distinction between soul and heart in that way. That's, I think, very helpful for the listeners, inshallah, for this series. Say the same question, but I want to ask you in a different way. If the human being is composed of different things, like the heart and like the soul, like the body, and different composites which make insan, when we say a human being's soul, what exactly part of ourselves are we referring to?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's quite an interesting question you've posed. So in regards to what we're referring to when we talk about the soul, just to bring my thoughts together, I'd say that we generally compartmentalize the soul. So you find in much of our literature, and we take it from the Quran, that there are different stages of the soul as it goes from being more material to completely immaterial, mujarrad. And at the same time, we've divided things into the heart, into the human spirit, and each one of these has its reality on a particular plane. But in its absolute sense, one has to remember that we've been created to move in a direction or evolution as such, which goes from the material to the immaterial. Eventually, we're all going to die. Now, when you're dead, so to speak, at least from the physical world, what is left is something which is completely immaterial. And within that substance, there are no divisions. So for us, I guess, there are divisions based upon the characteristics of this world. And so for that reason, it's easier for us to compartmentalize. Now, coming back onto the idea of the soul. It depends what you mean by the soul, because the soul can be interpreted as the ruh in many ways. What would you call that? You call that spirit, maybe. Or then you've got the division of the soul, in which you have the nafs amara, lawama, and so forth. But I want to look at it in slightly a different way. In a way which would be more practical to understand, I'd say that there's 5 compositions of the soul, or 5 things that we can go towards, more on a practical level. If you say the soul has 3 qualities to it, I guess those 3 qualities being to eat, to sleep, and then to procreate. You find that there's 5 levels of that. So you find one which is the animal soul, you could say. So within the maratib and nafsani, the first level is really the animal, or as scholars would say, that animal which has 4 legs, be it in the sea, be it on the ground, or be it in the sky, 2-legged, whatever it may be, 2 to 4 legs. Generally comes as 4, but let's just use the term animal for the time being. So you find that the first level is animal. And if a human being, all they do in their life is sleep, eat, and then procreate, that is at the level of the nafs, which is animalistic. But then it's interesting how that develops, because then you go into the second phase, which is that you have these 3 qualities or characteristics there of the nafs. But then you find there's another couple of qualities which come, or you could say vices, and that is when a human being begins to harm others. So you've got the idea, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're procreating, and then after that, this idea of harming someone. And so ulama have said that that's then the level of the predator. So whereas your soul was animalistic, but now you've come to the level of predator. And then it evolves again. So you've got all of those characteristics there, but then the extra characteristics. So for example, lying, cheating, abusing people, backbiting. And in tradition, it says that when a person develops these vices, then you become satanic. And your nafs is actually satanic. And when you ponder over this, and knowing that a number of weeks back, we had the birthday of the 5th Imam alayhi salam, you look at a tradition of his, whereby he talks about the last times. And he says that preserved are those people in the last times who do 2 things. One, who basically sit at home, and secondly, they cover their mouth, they don't talk. And when you look at this particular nafs, which is shaitani, and human beings therefore become Satan, and it's a very fine line. There are really 3 points here that separate Satan from a predator or an animal, and that is lying, cheating, or abusing, or getting angry with someone. All of these conditions pushes your nafs towards becoming satanic. But then go to the 2 other levels of the nafs. One of them being, you could say this is the 4th one, that a person again eats and drinks, sleeps, procreates, but then they don't cause harm to any other human being. And if that condition comes along, then according to ulama, that person is a malak. It's like an angel. So you could see already that there's a huge emphasis on not causing harm to someone. Somebody, let's say, abuses you, the ability to keep your mouth shut, the ability to not disrespect people behind their backs, the ability to not backbite about somebody. And you remember, backbiting means that the person has that vice in them. So here we're talking about transferring a piece of information which only you know, or which has happened between you and another person, and spreading it to a third person. If you're doing that, you're satanic. But if you're not, then you're a malak, an angel. And then here Ayatollah Hassan Zada Amali says, but to be a human being, for your nafs to be insan, to have the nafs of a human being, has all the qualities, the maqam of a malak, but there are 2 more things that you have to remember. Sayr ilallah fillah, the idea that a person is moving towards God, realities of light, realities of Tawheed. And so when a person starts doing that, moving towards God, through God, by God, then they become a human being. And that's when your nafs, you could truly say that my nafs is humane or human. And so if you look at those characteristics, actually the highest maqam that you can reach is really your primordial self, is the Adam, which is the Adam of humanity. And everything under that, if you analyze we analyze oneself on a daily basis. So the minute that you show anger, look where you are on this chart. For the minute one wants to abuse somebody, call them names or backbite or slander even. Remember, there's a lot of slander in our community based upon dhann, based upon knowledge that I'm not even certain of, and I pass it on. And this is why you see a lot of that today on social media, on WhatsApp. We're passing on things, people forward something on, haven't actually researched it at all. It could be positive, it could be negative. Sometimes you find that the words of the Imam, the kalam of the Imam is passed on. There's no truth to it. And so what have we done? We've fallen from that status of insan. So nafs isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
Actually, nafs is a very good thing. But it depends where on the chart one falls. And based upon that, I think in the easiest definition I would give, I would say when we're looking at the nafs in practical senses, that's what it is. Anything more than that becomes very technical, especially for those people who are not versed in the technicalities of spiritual language or theology or even jurisprudence.
Thank you. Especially in making distinctions in the journey of the nafs, because this discussion could have had, been at fear of being very abstract or very immaterial, because we are speaking of an immaterial subject matter. But by giving it clear, or at least as clear as we can, marks of progressing from one stage to another, it does help motivate the person that I've been through this stage and now I can go to the next stage. And as you mentioned, there are different ways that scholars have tried to categorize stage of development, and that's very helpful. One of the things it implies then is that the soul inherently has the capacity to grow and to develop, or the individual has this faculty of development. And this is the part which we're very interested in for today's discussion. And Sister Rebecca, based on the point that Said made, and in addition to it, the soul inherently is linked to our development as a human being. There's something about how the soul is in us that helps us to grow, and not physically, but in an immaterial way. My question to you is, what does it look like for a person to grow in the language of the soul? What does growth look like?
Well, it's not as smooth a journey as I've passed through that stage, and now I'm on to this stage. So it can go in phases and cycles. I think that when one is seeking truth, which is like a daily quest, I mean, there are, the language talks about unveilings, but sometimes that truth will be revealed to you after many years of thinking that you're going down the right path to find the truth. So I think particularly for people who are interested, let's say, in the struggle of the soul, and interested in acquiring a kind of a higher knowledge of the self and a higher knowledge of reality, we need to be careful about getting into all of these texts which sound very beautiful and written very beautifully and have a lot of lovely terminology and so on. You can start on that road. You think, I want to develop my soul. What do I do? Let me go to the texts. And then you find, like these itineraries of the soul, and these are the different stages. And you think, okay, so this sounds really amazing. And you kind of can become intoxicated with how these texts sound. But I think some of the things that we have not addressed in getting into these texts is the context in which the writers of those texts were living. And another thing that I reflect upon a lot today is we don't know a lot about their daily lives. If we take even the lives of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we don't know a lot about their daily lives. So yes, just like you said, we have to be careful not to become too abstract, and also I think not to denigrate the things that we may consider are not important. So I mentioned online, I think it was last week, that sometimes, we've got this very, very high ideal that we think, okay, I'm going to strive for that, and I'm going to become an arif, and and I'm going to take this journey, and nobody understands me, my family don't understand me, and I'm going to go on this special path, and I'm going to adopt all these special practices, and actually, because you're not you don't know like the context of the person who wrote that text, perhaps you are misapplying their teachings. So, and you can go on like that for like, say, 10 years, and then you start to find yourself getting tired. So what happens when you get tired? And what happens when you feel that you still have not reached this amazing pinnacle of al-insan al-kamil, and how do I get there? And, you know, so nowadays, I think when I read these texts, I think, okay, so after the person might have had this amazing vision of the attributes of Allah, say, and they're annihilated in Allah, say. I might have said this last year, but it's a thought that has remained with me. So who was cooking your dinner at the time? What happened after you had this amazing vision? Everywhere you look, there is the face of Allah. Okay, so are you in that state like 12 hours a day, 24 hours a day? What's happening when, you know, there might be inconveniences coming your way? Did you have to think about earning your living? Did you think about having to pay the mortgage? And over the years, when I've given these types of talks, because myself, I've been very, who cannot be captivated by a lot of these texts? And so you think, okay, so it's just a matter of understanding these texts and sharing what they're saying. But I've had people come up to me consistently saying, well, I barely get time. I don't even have time to have a cup of tea, let alone kind of sit down in a corner and do my dhikr as we are advised to do, say, by Imam Bakr alayhi salam. You know, he has recommended that if you want to get close to Allah, find a corner to sit down and remember Allah. But a lot of people don't have, number one, they don't have a corner in their house, especially not if they've got kids, if the house is small, if it's very crammed full of stuff. Where is the corner? Where can you find a corner to do that? So it's like practical things like that that we need to think about. And another thing is, we're living in a modern industrialized society where we are all caught up, or majority of people are now trapped in this system. We are slaves to this system. And so anytime someone used to come up to me and say, yeah, but, you know, I've got all this homework to do with my kids and I'm running here and there. So how do I reach this amazing pinnacle of, you know, this go through this amazing journey that's described in these books? And to be honest, I'd be thinking, okay, well, yes, maybe we need to think about that. And so, you know, having a family or getting into the practical aspects of life, some people can get frustrated because they think this is taking me away from my idea of a spiritual life. But actually, when you look at the lives of, you know, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his holy progeny, yes, certain times of year, he would go to the cave to do his contemplation. End of the month of Ramadan, then there's an opportunity for contemplation. But of course, Islam has never shunned the practical aspect of life. So there's two things here. One is that, to be honest, I think that if we are, by the way, my screen has gone a bit funny. Can you still see me?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah, okay, fine. I tend to get these interferences on my screen, so I'll just carry on talking. Hopefully it'll correct itself. I don't know who's where it's spyware on my, anyway. So so yeah, there's two issues here, which is that one, we don't know a lot about the small details of the lives of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and two, we are living in a very different world from what they lived in. And I actually think, and of course now we're in Akhir Zaman, these times were predicted by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And so I think that if we're going to understand the kind of journey that we need to take, then we need to read their narrations and what they were saying about Akhir Zaman, because we're not living in the same time that they were. Bottom line is, we actually really need to get out of this system of enslavement, this system that has trapped us all mentally, psychologically, spiritually, physically. Everybody's trapped. And until and unless we reform the actual economic system that we're living in, it's going to be very, very difficult to embark on the kind of journey that we are finding in these books. And also, if we are going to go on this journey, we need to understand the historical context in which we are living as well. So I think it's a problem if we decontextualize the journey of the soul. We need to reflect upon what we're living, the situation that we're living in now, the conditions that we're living in now. And like I said, not denigrate the small aspects of what appear to be the small aspects of the journey, which is just wake up in the morning and be conscious of the day starting. You know, see what's in front of you. Try to see and appreciate what you find in front of you. The fact that you know you've been blessed with these senses, and appreciate the senses that you've been given. And like I say, this journey, it can go in cycles. You can spend many years on one particular path, and suddenly you start to see the flaws, very fundamental flaws in the way you've been approaching that path. And so then you have to go through a dramatic, or maybe not so dramatic, adjustment and alteration. So it's involved continual adjustments and alterations. And of course, there has to be the desire to do that as well, and the courage and the motivation to do that. Sometimes going on this journey involves inconvenience, and it might even involve alienating, you know, people that we know. We don't want to alienate anybody, but to really reform oneself, of course, there's always that question of how we relate to others around us when we may be, you know, going down a different road. And so it requires courage to step out of the status quo. This is the primary thing. It requires courage to change yourself and therefore, you know, change your environment, and then you can continue to change yourself. If we are comfortable and we like our comforts, and we prefer our comforts over and above the inconveniences and the discomfort from self-reform, then we're not going to get very far.
I think we have very well defined what it looks like to not travel the journey in a sustainable way. You know, we've noticed we've highlighted a lot of very easy pitfalls, mistakes a lot of people make, either in their practice in daily life or in their interaction with our tradition or with texts or with their mindset. We know what it looks like to not do it well, but we also know what it looks like to do it with perfection in terms of Ahl al-Bayt and their approach to this journey, which if every individual has an option on how they conduct themselves in it, we do have role models. But like your sister Rebecca, we have to use them in the right way. We have to use the traditions, contextualize them, put them in their proper place, you know, to be beneficial to us. In that context, here comes Abu Abdullah, here comes Imam Hussain in his journey. And what we see with him, as we have kind of discussed in the past, is a person going through the same journey which we're speaking about, but in his way to find Allah Azza wa Jal. Through his speeches, through his words, through his conduct, we see a template. And some parts of it are relevant to us. Some parts of it might not apply to us in exactly the same way. I want to start with this point with you, Said, if you will, please. Why is Abu Abdullah relevant to my spiritual journey? This is this journey which we're speaking about. We want support, we want help for it. What role does Imam Hussein play in my own journey to God?
It's quite a profound question you've asked there. And I think for every individual, the answer is going to be different. If I was to give you just a blanket statement, I don't think that would be pertinent. But I can only speak from personal experience, because, say, the shuhada for different people means different things. For certain people, for example, in the past, it meant revolution. So you see the whole Zaydi movement based upon a form of activism that led to revolution. You saw the Hassanites say it, same thing, and then after that, the development of the Idrisi dynasty in Morocco. For the Abbasis, it was a war fight, effectively, against the Umayyad dynasty. And I think for me, sometimes when I look at the interpretation of Imam Hussein, especially in the modern age, it makes me think that the methodology we're following is not at all the methodology. This idea of revolution and protest is a good thing. However, it's not the methodology of the Imams, nor was it the methodology of Imam Hussein in many ways, especially given the context that things change. And so therefore, it requires for the seerah of all of the Imams to be looked at in the context of Imam Hussein's. So anyhow, coming to the 21st century, coming to myself, if you take Imam Hussein, or at least I take Imam Hussein as really the goal, it's the benchmark. And whenever you go into your practical life or your personal life, it's an interpretation of exactly what is it that he applied, how did he do it, and what is a roadmap towards Allah. Because look, what is Imam Hussein's actual aim? He goes to Karbala for one reason, and I guess that reason is to get closer to Allah. But as the tradition says, if we take that hadith to be correct, that letter to Muhammad Hanafiya, he leaves Medina for the purpose of Islah, of the Ummah of his grandfather. That's the purpose of going to Karbala. That's the purpose of the movement. But what is his absolute aim? His absolute aim is to please Allah, to move towards God. So automatically there you're seeing a multi-layer come into place. That at different stages, though there's one aim, but one tailors their aim to a particular period, and there's a goal for that particular period. The goal for Imam Hussein leaving Medina was what? So that's the first movement of Imam Hussein, which he does. Now, if I was to ask the question, did Imam Hussein only move to do Islah of the Ummah, or was it the fact that he was doing it for Allah? Well, everybody would say, look, the primary reason for Imam Hussein is that he's moving for Allah. But at every stage of his movement, he has a goal. And there's a particular goal. So the first goal really is Islah. It's rectification, it's reform. More than reform is rectifying. It's almost as if, look, there's a straight line and a person deviates from that line. So the Ummah had deviated, and he as a spiritual father, or you could say a spiritual teacher or a doctor, he needs to rectify that and re-move the Ummah back onto line again. So the compass, you could say, has moved in a particular way that it shouldn't have done. Now his responsibility in this movement away from Medina is to rectify it. And so at every stage you notice, and you look at his speeches, you'll see the sermons. If that's one letter he's writing in Medina, then you see a shift again in policy when it comes to Mecca. And you see another shift when the Hajj changes. And you see another shift on his way to Kufa. And you see another shift in Karbala. Right? By shift, I mean that the aims at that moment, the goal at that moment changes. But the absolute aim is the same, service to God. It's getting closer to Allah. It's really creating a light. And so what Imam Hussein symbolizes is light. And light is truth, it's life, right? And if you go to the Hukama, the philosophers or the great thinkers in Islam, and all of them seem to have the same definition, that what is life? What does life mean? And Imam Hussein is giving life. And what is life? Life is basically, they break it down into two things. It's al-hayy, says that the hay, when they talk about life itself, huwa darrak wa fa'al. Those are the two qualities of what life is, what it is to be alive. One is the idea of comprehension, the idea that you can idrak something, dark something, you can understand something. So it's an understanding that leads to movement, motion. And so what Imam Hussein is giving her to the Ummah, to myself, let's say, is an understanding, and through that understanding we go into motion. If a person doesn't have that understanding, if they are jahil, you could say jahl. Jahl is death, because there's no comprehension, there's no understanding. And so therefore there's no motion. But what true dark is, what true understanding is that it gives you the ability to move. It's a mover. So what Imam Hussein does in Medina is he's moving. There's a motion because there's a overarching understanding. Now, bring it back to our days. If you find certain characteristics of people that, inshallah, we're not part of them, but you find some who are jahil and they don't know they're jahil. So what happens there? when a person has compound ignorance, you're basically jailed. Sometimes you're ignorant and you know you're ignorant, and that's fine. You're jailed, but there's a door open. But a person sometimes comes into a valley whereby they don't realize that they're ignorant. And because they don't, there's no exit out. But let's say, for example, you do move out, you go towards the light, because as you know, the Imam has said, alayhi salam, he says, al-ilmu nurun. So ilm is light. And what Imam Hussein is teaching is a movement to the light. And this is why, again, it's important to bear in mind, why is lying so bad for, right? Why is lying, according to some traditions, even worse than committing adultery? Because lying is obscuring the truth. You're painting a false picture, and so therefore you're disconnecting yourself and others from the light. So in that respect, Imam is moving, there's a motion there, there's a higher level of understanding. And I guess it's important for us to bear that in mind, or at least for myself, is that in life, I need to try and move towards the light, facilitate my way towards that. Now, when I know that I have to facilitate my way towards that, what is required? The first stage as the Imam leaves Medina is Islah. So what do I need to do Islah of? If I take my body as the Ummah, right? If I take my entire body and my existence, if I take all of those compound elements and bring them together into a body form, as we do in Muharram, as you know, we've been told to cry as one body, mourn as one body of Azah. So if I take my body as one, then therefore I have to rectify everything from the top to bottom. And as has rightly been said, sometimes when you read some of these spiritual books, what context they're in, why is the person saying this? Can we lose ourselves in that? And one has to remember these are all theoretical. And this is why even on the practical level, you need somebody like Imam Hussein, or somebody trained by Imam Hussein, or somebody who has that wilaya passed down from Imam Hussein. And they work as a doctor to be able to prescribe to you that which is specific for you to be able to break the prison that you're stuck in. Because otherwise it really makes no difference. I can go, there's books behind me of that nature. What is that going to achieve other than theory? I can read all of these books and there's probably many traditions behind me, but that's what it is. It's behind me. What's in front of me needs to be something else. And what's in front needs to be practical. So now coming back to Imam Hussein. So I think at every stage you can learn something. And the reason why Imam Hussein is relevant is because he paints a picture of life. But now, if I'm not a Muslim, why is Imam Hussein relevant? Right, that's also important. And I've found in life, practical life, that people kind of move towards Imam Hussein. They have this affinity to him, regardless of who they are, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. When a person is exposed to Imam Hussein, they cry, they feel pain, there's an emotion, there's something attached. And the only way I can see it is that there's a system in the world that when a person is sincere, the more sincere they are, the more of an impact they have on a person's heart. If a person is very sincere, even more of an impact. But let's say if a person's like Sayyid al-Shuhada, sincerity leads to the martyrdom of his entire family. He's hungry, he's thirsty, his son's ill, the other one's lips are dry, one's taken a lance in his chest, his women are with him, his sisters are with him, his sons are with him. So in that context, when a person is so sincere, when there's so much light, so to speak, then that light transcends time. There's no qaid of zaman and makan. And there's no qaid of a person who is Muslim or non-Muslim. This is why the hadith doesn't say that a person who cries for Imam Hussein, the qaid is the ba'arif and bahaqqah. That's only for ziyarah of Imam Hussein. That's not actually for crying, that's not for tears. You could be anyone from any walk of life who cries for Imam Hussein, and you find that there's guidance and light that comes into your life. And that's what I find quite strange, that here's a man who makes an impact. Just yesterday there was a story in front of me. One of my colleagues went to a bishop and he had this small flag of Imam Hussein that he carries around with him in his pocket, and he took it out. And he said, look, the Pope's coming to Glasgow, so could you have this blessed? So the bishop didn't understand at the time what he was trying to say. And eventually he gave the story of Imam Hussein. And in the room, the bishop is crying and this colleague of mine's crying, and both of them are crying with tears. And he goes, now I understand. And now I'm going to try my best to get this flag to where it needs to, right? And anyhow, what's right, what's wrong, that's, regardless. But as an old man, that's what he wanted. He wanted his flag to go there because every other religious leader has blessed it in the world. And so he wanted it like that as well. But the key part of the story is this, that there were tears by a bishop who's got nothing to do with Islam. When the martyrdom was explained, he cried. So what is it about Imam Hussein? I think even I can't even answer that question because it's something which is in the heart. You just can't, you can't put it in words. Why does he have that kind of an impact? Why is it that, regardless of a person of faith, and I've seen this myself, of no faith, a person who doesn't have faith, who's an atheist, decides to take a trip to Karbala because they're part of a UN mission and gets to Imam Hussein's grave and begins to cry. Why does that happen? Why do these things happen? I don't think it can be explained. But I think we're onto something because we've got a great power. We're underutilizing it. But I think if we were to use that, at least for ourselves, it would actually diminish some of the flames of anger that we have in our own hearts. We're a very angry community. If you look today, I'm thinking we're all speaking from London at this moment in time. So if we take this London, it's like fire within our communities. You look at it and see there's a lot of aggression, there's a lot of anger. And I think if we take Imam Hussein truly, I think that there's calm, there's light, there's peace in that message. But it's about extracting it. It's about not just taking Imam Hussein as a cultural item, but now deeply traveling and really seeing what Imam Hussein symbolizes. And I think one of the ways that I see that is when I see other people of other faiths engaging with Imam Hussein, and it's very humbling. So anyhow, in reply to your question, it's difficult for me, but I can only take it personally. I can take it personally that I think what Imam Hussein gives me, I'm hoping other people, he may give different things. And the reason being is that everybody's unique, so everybody will see it in a different way. But it's really about Islah of the whole and a movement of consciousness, of knowledge, ma'rifah. And this movement is taking us to Allah.
Yeah, a lot of very beautiful points there. I want to make a distinction though, to make it clear. So there's non-Muslims at Imam Hussein, there's mourning for Imam Hussein, there is the community, and then there's Imam Hussein himself. There's the way that he actually was in his life. And different people are always going to take different things from him. And that was actually a very great variety of examples of what we can take from Abu Abdullah. But Imam Hussein is himself. He has his own journey, his own process, his own journey to Allah Azza wa Jal. And you mentioned a point there which I think symbolizes how I was thinking about this issue was Abu Abdullah, he himself goes from a position of understanding to a position of motion, meaning that in himself, he has a approach to the world or to Allah, and that impels him, that compels him to move and to go on that journey. But like you said, it's not just a physical journey. Underneath that, there is a migration to Allah also happening. Before we go on to mourning and tears, Sister Rebecca, let's go back to that point of Imam Hussein's own individual process. So he has a certain world view, and he has his own kind of state of heart, his soul is in a certain maqam. And for him, he needs to move to Allah. He needs to migrate to Allah for Abu Abdullah. What I'd like to ask you is, what is Imam Hussein's journey? This spiritual journey he's actually going through, in addition to the physical journey to Karbala, for example. What does that journey look like in his life towards Allah?
Well, I wouldn't want to say. I think only Imam Hussein alayhi salam could say that. I just want to differ slightly with your statement on how he has the understanding and that propels him into motion, because there we are overlooking or forgetting the issue of predestination as well. And what was his destiny, what had been written for him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what was always known about how he was destined for sacrifice. So, and also the fact that, first of all, he's got this understanding and then he moves. I think that that movement was always in his life. I mean, if we look at how he was raised, the household he was raised in, Imam Ali alayhi salam having to, again, get involved in so many very, very difficult situations to try to rectify things and try to keep things on track and try to stop things from falling apart. It wasn't like Imam Hussein alayhi salam had kind of lived a peaceful life of contemplation, and then when the time comes, then he starts to set out. And this was his setting out was just a continuation of what he had been raised in, right from the beginning, even from the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, moving from Mecca to Medina, that movement as well. So he was always part of this ongoing movement towards perhaps some supporters, or to make a point, or for many other reasons, but as part of that distancing from wrongdoing and trying to make the point about what is the right action and what is right doing. Another thing is we need to be careful about thinking that he's going on a journey towards Allah in the same way that we go on a journey towards Allah, because he is Ma'soom, he was born an Imam. And of course, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt always increase in knowledge, like they have said in the narrations. Every week they are taken up to the throne and they are increased in knowledge. So that journey towards Allah, in a sense, could be looked at as a completion of a journey, not necessarily as he's leaving Medina, as he's leaving Mecca, as the commencement of a journey towards Allah, but almost as the final steps towards the inevitable. So he knows that he's going to be meeting his Lord, and that's something to reflect upon. If anyone has had relatives that have been ill for a period of time, had terminal illnesses, where they know they're going to die, and it's a time for preparing for your death. It's a time of great learning and self-reform. I'm not saying Imam Hussein alayhi salam was going through a period of learning and self-reform, but it's a time of preparation. Let's say it's a time of, this is it. I'm stepping out of this world. But of course, with Imam Hussein alayhi salam as well, he was completing his mission, just as the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, had to complete his mission as well. So it's not a journey through the stages of the soul, as is kind of laid out by some of these more Neoplatonically inspired texts. I can only again guess. I can only guess upon what Imam Hussein alayhi salam may have been experiencing. And I think something that has struck me, like Sayyid was saying, is that as a contrast to these very Neoplatonic inspired texts, the journey of Imam Hussein alayhi salam tells us about a very different way of going on a journey or attaining some kind of spirituality, and that is to face ugliness, to face the real hard brutality that exists in this world. I think today, because of media, we are all very well aware of the sheer ruthless brutality that is meted out to oppressed people across the world, and this is what is very downheartening and quite depressing. You can start to feel helpless, like my days are numbered, my years are short, and am I going to make any difference while I'm here to the sheer scale of brutality and cruelty and oppression? And it can be difficult to face that. It's very difficult to live with it on a daily basis. But I think that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his journey, like earlier I was talking about courage, his journey is a journey of courage, of course, that has been given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's all part of being an Imam, that courage and that bravery and presence of mind and focus and calmness knowledge about what to do in every situation, no no hesitancy with anything. All that's given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that's something that we could learn from, that going towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not always involve having beautiful experiences. I think this is an important thing to take on, that and maybe sometimes we're misled, especially by kind of new age influences, about what we think about spirituality, that especially nowadays with the influence of psychology as well, modern psychology and modern spirituality, where there's this idea that we need to move towards equilibrium, we need to move towards harmony and a sense of peace, wholeness. A lot of these psychologists nowadays talk about wholeness and moving towards wholeness and so on. And I question that. I question whether the goal that we're aiming for is a place of flowers and butterflies and a place of beauty and a place of equilibrium and a place of peace. I think that if one actually, on the contrary, as one reflects more and more and more and contemplates more and more and more, becomes more and more sensitive on a energetic level or a spiritual level, you become more and more and more sensitive to negativity, evil, hypocrisy, just the sheer darkness that is out there in the world, that one then has to start to guard against that overwhelming you and making you ill. That's the question that we should be looking at. I mean, everybody's ill today. Majority of people are ill and struggling with different kinds of illnesses that are wrapped up with also, depression and autoimmune diseases and this and that. This is all part of the journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and becoming more aware of how this world is so corrupt. So that journey with Imam Hussain, I mean, one thing I can say is that it was a confrontation with darkness. He was able to stand there and look evil in the face, and look hypocrisy in the face, and look corruption in the face. And that's what we need to do. And we need to be aware that maybe we're not going to reach this place of tranquility. We might not reach this place of tranquility. We might, on the contrary, be crying for, the more that we learn about the world, the more we cry. And the more ill at ease we feel, and the more uncomfortable we feel with being here. So perhaps that is a sign of progression, that you actually feel more pain as you progress, not less pain. And you have to have the shoulders to bear that pain. That's perhaps what Imam Hussain alayhi salam had, the capacity to bear the pain of being in this world.
Yeah, this is such a good point, and I'm glad we've made this realization, because the person listening might see the story of Abdullah as so separate from them that they don't allow it to affect how they approach their challenges or their worries. The story begins and ends in the majalis, for example. This is a known issue that we are facing in the community, but this approach means that no, now when I face my issues, I'm at least more comfortable with being in pain, because my Imam was in pain and he gained something from that. Maybe it's something that I can gain by enduring, by having hilm, by building myself up. And like you mentioned, your shoulders become stronger. Your back can bear more weight through this process. I remember last time we three gathered to have a discussion last Muharram, Sister Rebecca, you mentioned this point about when you were once in Karbala, and there was the sensory overload of the drums and the noise and the heat at that time, and one of the times you mentioned. And it occurred to you then that maybe being in that level of intensity is what brings that benefit to some degree. Being under the heat, you get some level of benefit from being in that situation. And say at that time you mentioned that, well, this is an example of dhikr amali, where doing actions which are hard are actually important. And I wonder if we can carry on as we close on that final point, which is, why is doing things and challenging your demons and confronting and being at peace with suffering, something that Shias have historically taken from Abu Abdullah and non-Muslims too. You know, for some reason we become so much better at dealing with pain and suffering when we see our Imam dealing with it and the way that he deals with it. Why is that?
I don't know if we are apt at dealing with pain and suffering. I can see a lot of people suffering and they're not able to deal with it. But I guess it humanizes a person when they see that their Imam also suffered. So I would humbly disagree with that statement, that after looking at the COVID era, watching it very closely, I think every family is suffering. Every Shia family or non-Shia family are suffering in some shape, way, form. Somebody's lost a loved one. But the ability to recover, or I would say the ability to get solace from the life of Imam Hussein through his suffering, is something which is profound. And when you look at the Imam, as Dr. Masterton said quite well, you know, Imam Hussein's journey is not a journey effectively of just bliss. There's a lot of suffering along the way. In fact, you look at a hadith that Imam is on the battlefield and there's 2 occasions where he can't take it and he stops and he recites 2 units of prayers. One of those times was when he lost his 6-month-old baby. And that shows the human side of a man who then had to recite 2 units of prayer, appeal to God, and then there was a calmness that came forward. And as much as you can say that this is all predestined, it was all there was his destiny, and of course he knew his destiny, but that doesn't remove the human side of a person. Even Imam Ma'soom, and this is why there's a hadith that says that the more in your faith you increase, the more love you have, especially for those your family members, your spouse, your children. So for Imam Hussein, it is a tragedy, and he's going through a tragedy, and there's an evolution, I would say, of emotion that's taking place, because Imam Hussein's emotion is not the same. You can see from his speeches, yes, there may not have been a spiritual evolution in the sense that Imam was at the pinnacle, if we use that term. Although again, many would disagree with that to say, well, if the Imam's ilm increases every Thursday night, all of the Imams, when they're called up to the Arsh, then surely the Ma'rifah also increases, which is okay. And that's also an argument that Allah is La Mahdud, and the Imam's capacity for taking on a weekly basis the Hujjat of Allah's capacity increases and increases. So that's an argument. But there was a point that was mentioned, and I think it's worth emphasizing, is that when we talk about life, right, when we talk about life itself, we mentioned that there are 2 qualities of life. But then what that leads to when a person increases in knowledge, again, there's a hadith of the Imam, says there's 2 things that it leads to. One is tafakkur and one is buqa. Buqa is tears. Buqa is crying. And you notice Sayyidah Zainab, look at her tears, or look at the night of Ashura, when the companions are realizing and coming to realize something, tears are flowing. Crying is going on. There's something about tears which Allah likes. And so for that reason, you find that he may break many people's hearts in this lifetime. In the words of Moses, he says, Allah, I'm brokenhearted. Allah replies, I'm for the brokenhearted. Sometimes one goes through, and this is why there's a very profound statement of the Imam when he prays. He says, Allah, basically, give me the capacity before you test me, or give me the understanding before you test me. So I think Imam Hussein, yes, gives solace to us. His whole movement is his life, his suffering. But I wouldn't say that we're inherently able to deal with pain and suffering. What I would say, though, is that Imam Hussein gives us the ability, when we focus upon him, when we do tamarkuz upon him. And then also, the second part of your question is this amali side. And one has to remember, mawadda is amali. It's not just hub in the way that you hide that love in your heart. But mawadda is an active form of love that requires expression. And because wilaya has a lot to do with love, mawadda, for that purpose, you'll find that there's an active movement that we go through, whether it's love, whether it's expression. Expression can be sacred, right? Expression can be sacred. And you find that the expression on the day of Ashura that takes place in Karbala, even in your mosque, that's sacred. That's a sacred expression that takes you to the divine. And so I would therefore then say on this particular point that yes, what Imam Hussein does do for us is he allows us through this wasila to go to Allah very fast. And I think he allows us to keep our hearts soft so that waqa comes, the understanding increases. And effectively, as you know, if you open up any biography of any mystic who's been on this journey, there are places where you find that they're broken, they're crying, they're lamenting in front of their God. And what this movement of Imam Hussein does is he makes an entire nation into mystics effectively, because it teaches us how to cry. And I think in the 21st century, at least many men have forgotten how to cry. And crying is a component which is very important if one is to achieve any form of, you could say enlightenment, but I don't know if that's the right word to use, but any form of enlightened intellect, enlightened heart. So it's not just rational, but your emotions, your feelings, your being is attached in that. And I think it's attached in your tears, it's attached in your love for Imam Hussein. And so hence we're living. We're a living nation. Where many nations may have died, that they're breathing, but they may have died. We are a living nation. Even when our eyes close, this nation lives on. And I think because of the fact that the soul of this nation is Imam Hussein.
I want to ask one last question to both of you on this point of crying, because we will have listeners right now who are either able to go majalis, or maybe they're not able to go to the Majlis of Imam Hussein for the situation that we're in, or they haven't been able to go and now they're returning back to being in the presence of the Majlis itself. But that doesn't mean that their mourning for Abu Abdullah is restricted or should stop. It just means it takes a different form, I guess. But the point is that by mourning for Imam Hussein, we gain something, we benefit from something. Now, the reason why we cry is because it's sad, because it's a sad story, and it naturally brings emotion to the heart, but it also has an effect on us, right? And the last question I would like to ask both of you is, the person who's listening to this discussion, the person who's going to majalis, what should they take from the story of Abu Abdullah for their own self-reformation? What lesson, if there's one that you could summarize or that we could end with, what's a lesson which they take from the majlis with them? Because we've looked at a lot, but I wonder what one you'd like to prioritize for the listeners. Sister Rebecca, why don't you go first?
I hesitate to use this word benefit in relation to cry from Hussein alayhi salam. It sounds a little bit mercenary. What am I going to get out of crying from Imam Hussein, and what benefit? You know, I was thinking about this a few weeks ago because somebody asked me, what are the psychological benefits of crying
You wrote
from
on this.
Hussein?
I remember you wrote a piece on this.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. And I just thought, well, if you were going to go to the grave of one of your family members, or one of your family members has been brutally massacred, and you are going back to cry over what happened to them, are you going to be approaching their grave thinking, what psychological benefits am I going to get out of this? What are the benefits I'm going to get out of this? So I don't know if that's, maybe I'm being too hardline. I don't know if that's the right approach to think, what benefits do I get out of this? Or we should think about the benefits. But one thing I do think every time Muharram comes round is, and I'm sure many other people do as well, is that how are we following through from our tears? So if we're talking about self-reform, you know, are we again thinking that we are these great Shia of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, and you know, we are demonstrating what great Shia followers we are by crying for him, but yet we're not able, because of our own psychological weaknesses and disconnects, we're not able to follow that through in our lives. And one thing that I'm thinking about a lot this year is about the condition of Iraq as an example. The fact that billions of dollars have been siphoned out of the economy that were meant for the people of Iraq, but people of Iraq themselves are just left with nothing to try to survive. And I wonder if we are facing this reality, like when we go for ziyarah, or even it's coming up from a Muharram, and we are, you know, trying to honor the sacred with the majlis, definitely trying to honor the sacred, but just not maybe taking that extra step of, so how am I going to trying to work towards the sheer level of corruption that is literally around the maqam of Imam Hussain alayhi salam today? Or am I, you know, I'm going to do my ziyarah, I'm going to cry at the majlis, I've relayed my sufra, I've had my guests, we've done what we need to do, and now I'm going to go back to my day job. And I'm not saying everybody does that. I think a lot of people are thinking about the troubles of this world and how we can do something about that. But I think that we are, in some ways, still in a condition of political naivety. I think there's a degree of naivety in terms of the situation today, and that we need to get smart, so to speak. Like the imams, they need followers who are up to date with the strategies that are being played out in the world today. So if we are going to serve the imam, I would say, you know, if we want to talk about any kind of benefits and self-reform, I would say that crying for Imam Hussein alayhi salam needs to be followed through again with the courage to face what is going on in the world today. As I said online some time back, the reason why we cry for Imam Hussein alayhi salam is because back then people didn't have the courage to change the status quo. His followers, people who loved him, did not have the courage to stand by him. So it's kind of paradoxical that we then, all these centuries later, are going to go to Karbala, we're going to cry for Imam Hussein, and we're still not going to have the courage to change the status quo, the very status quo that led to the martyrdom of Imam Hussein in the first place. So if the people had had the courage back then to stand by him, we wouldn't have been crying for him. But now it's like we go to cry for him, and that is, of course, like respected as a sacred practice. But there seems to be sometimes this shying away from attaching it to what people call worldly things. Oh, don't attach it to worldly. Crying for Imam Hussain's got nothing to do with worldly things. It's like, well, he died because of the condition of the world. Like, he was living in the world, he was living in the material world, and he died because of the conditions of the material world in which he was living. So yes, it's a sacred practice to cry for Imam Hussain, but we're still in the material world, and we're still living under the same conditions of oppression and corruption that he was living in. And so the big question comes: do we have the courage to stand by Imam Hussain? You know, we say, "Oh, if only I had been with you, it would have been a great victory." Well, do we have the courage to stand with him today? So, I think this takes some deep thought on whether we are really doing enough to change the conditions in which not just lovers of Ahlul Bayt, but so many people are living in today, because of the massive, sophisticated theft that major corporations are carrying out.
I'm glad you had we have this space for you to affirm or reaffirm that point about crying. Notice I signal my agreement in the way I rephrase the question to say it. What reform does the individual go through as a result of the mourning for Abu Abdullah? And actually, if we make this point very clear, it is Muharram. There's a lot of momentum. The community does tend to activate in this time. You know, what is a sign that they are actually benefiting from? No, I did it again. What's a sign that they are genuinely making active steps of self-reformation in light of the opportunity we have for Muharram?
Hey, don't worry, we get what you mean. No one's going to pass any judgment. We suspend judgment as well here. So, from the way that I interpreted your first ask, I would say that what I would take, and I've had 5 minutes to think about it now as well. So I would say what I take away from it, or let's say if I was sitting in a majlis now, what I would take away from it immediately is how to act compassionately. So that's one thing that I want to take away. And this is why you may notice that the scholars of this particular practice will always say that if you want to know that your majlis or your ziyarah has been accepted, see the change inside of yourself. A lot of it comes back to the individual. Look, I don't know what change a person is looking for, because every individual is different. So it's really up to the person what change they're looking for. But if they walk away from that majlis even learning one thing, forget that, in 10 days if they learn one thing, and if they make a change of one action in 10 days, I think that that's sufficient enough to start a domino effect. So what are the markers? I think I can only give you universal, and that's if you're looking to change, because not everybody is, but if you're looking to change, if you're looking to become a better person, then what is the one thing that you can apply when you leave a majlis? But coming back to some of the other points that have been mentioned in terms of, yeah, there is corruption in the world, is only going to get worse, right? Unless if somebody puts a stop to it. There are people dying until somebody doesn't put a stop to it. There's going to be abuse of resources until somebody doesn't put a stop to it. You're going to find carbon levels increasing until somebody doesn't put a stop to it. We've got all of these goals for 2030. Will they be achieved? Is it just lip service? So I guess if on a universal level a person wants to make a change, then there needs to be a strategy which goes above and beyond me just standing outside an embassy, although that has its purpose and place. But there's one thing venting your anger out and standing outside and screaming. And there's one thing becoming proactive and learning the tools to be able to then implement what you want to implement, or at least have a standing chance of implementing and raising the intellect or the intellectual capacity of a couple of people. On that basis, therefore, I think what Imam Hussain would do, and there's a lot of goodwill. There's a lot of goodwill that comes in the month of Muharram, and a lot of youth are really re-energized. They want to do something practical. And then all of a sudden, because they're not given the line, it collapses again. So this is a time where people's passions are there. But now I come to this point, I'm going to be a bit critical, not of the people, but of the leaders in our community. It's because the leaders of a community are not of the caliber to be able to give direction to those people looking for it. You say 10 youths, they're very passionate. Who do they go to? They want to do something. So they may go to the leaders in their community. If the leaders of their community just give them something very much abstract and say, get on with it, is that going to satisfy them? And I think much of it comes down today, I guess, to direction. Because remember, community requires a head. The body requires a head, somebody to take it forward. And where you don't find that, or where there's a conflict of leadership, or there's conflict of people, one person saying one thing, another person saying another thing, it leads to confusion. So what you find many youth will say today is, well, because of the conflict, I'm just going to answer to Imam Zaman alayhi salam, whatever I do now. And again, if 350 million of us are doing that, there's going to be conflict somewhere. So I think that this, though it's a very noble thing to say, but there's going to be conflict. If every single Shia in the world decided to do what they thought was best, what happens? Similarly, you'll see, without giving saying a political statement here, but let's say, for example, if all checks and balances that we have for COVID-19 in the UK is lifted, let's say, as much as you may think that people are able to take care of themselves, you can imagine that within a week, there'll be 60, 70,000 cases. So there needs to be some kind of check and balance in place. And I think that we have to, as a community, from the elders all the way down, need to develop, need to mature. And I guess this is what, in the Farsi, you talk about buzurg, right? Somebody who's an elder. But buzurg needs to show buzurgi. They need to show their elderness, if you could say so. And that only comes when a person themselves are, and I hate to use this term, but balance themselves. They themselves are knowledgeable and practicing and have all of the traits required for leadership. And I think only then But okay, let's go to individual goals. I think set yourself a goal. Go into a majlis, set yourself a goal. Listen to something about Imam Sayyid al-Shuhada. On these nights, especially the big nights, look at the way that he interacts with his children. Have I got an issue when it comes to, for me, when I interact with my children? Do I lose my temper quickly? What's Imam Hussein doing here? His thirsty daughters asking him, for argument's sake, saying, I'm thirsty. Now, if you're already stressed out, as many people are, well, they say, look, you know we don't have any water. Why are you asking this question? He doesn't say that. He's not giving a reaction. He's not showing harshness. There's softness there in his tone and his being. Or, for example, how one treats their friends. So in the entire Karbala, you could see relationships, how Imam Hussein deals with a wife, children, friends, sister, even if we were to sort that out in the 10 days. I think slowly you'd progress, because remember, tawfiq is what's required. Tawfiq comes with barakah. You start doing the right thing, Allah starts opening the right doors. So I think, we can sit down and get completely perplexed as well. Sometimes it's overwhelming. I remember, I go back 20 years ago, I'm overwhelmed. Why? Oh my God, there's so many things we've got to do. How do I do it? Actually, no, take care of the little things. How my interactions, how am I? Slowly see doors open. Those people who have had the biggest impact on the world started off on a very small scale. Started off just rectifying certain things about themselves, or increasing or expanding their knowledge in certain things. And you see Allah opens the right door. So that's what I would take away from it. So what would I? Compassion. My first majlis, hopefully, if I can become a more compassionate person, start reflecting the Rahmaniyya of Allah in my daily life, I think I would have achieved something. And hopefully 10 other doors open then to achieve 10 more things.
So as we have seen with this topic of Ashura and reforming the soul, it's not easy. There is a very delicate balance to be had between getting it right, using the right resources, the right sources, traveling on the right path, and adopting the right approach and attitudes towards reforming the soul. And all of these go back to how you regard yourself. And through Abu Abdullah, through Ashura, through Imam Hussain, we regard ourselves as having great potential. And so we're taking whatever provision we can from the message of Imam Hussain, whether it's the benefit of crying, whether it's activism and our responsibility to one another, whether it's leadership and what we expect of our leaders and how we can improve these things. There is much we can take, but crucially, it's such a fine and delicate balance between misunderstanding Imam Hussain and seeking something which is not there for us, and not taking exactly what is beneficial for our journey, especially when it comes to self-reformation. So we pray that the listeners, inshallah, that by you take from this example and this discussion the notion that yes, there's my heart and there will be my mind and my body, but the soul itself needs special attention, and we wish everyone the best in their own personal journeys in reforming the soul.